Okay, I see. So where do you uh believe the line kind of lies between like what an RD does and where someone who does not have that experience or that schooling shouldn't really the waters that they really shouldn't go into?
Yeah, so I think the biggest kind of line that you're walking on is meal plans is going to be a big one. So only registered dietitians can prescribe meal plans. That's a huge one. Now, macros are not a meal plan. So, like, giving someone macro recommendations is definitely something that would be okay for someone with experience to do, even if they don't have the certification. And I think, as far as walking that line goes, it is a very fine line. But like I said, as long as you have real life experience and, maybe an additional nutrition certification, I think that it's totally fine, giving nutrition advice, not necessarily prescribing for like a chronic disease like diabetes, but just giving general nutrition advice to your, average healthy person, I think would be totally fine.
Okay, so you think the two biggest things would be prescribing specific diet plans to people and then also using food as a uh, cure or as a treatment.
Correct.
Those
Correct.
would be the
Yep.
two big things. But outside of that, you feel like most coaches or people who at least have some amount of experience in nutrition are fine doing stuff outside of that.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's still a very fine line. So there's a lot of nuances that I could go into, but those are the two main things is like, prescribing something as far as someone with a chronic disease goes, and also just meal plans in general, telling someone exactly what they should be eating and what amounts. Yeah.
So, what would be an example of a nuance there?
There are many, many. So I would say, well, one, you shouldn't be giving nutrition advice if you have no experience and no certification. Like those are the two things you either have to have one or the other. So in my opinion, you can get a shitty nutrition certification and not know your shit and do things, and you're like, oh, well, I have a certification. It's okay to do that. I think that experience with real life people and real life situations is always going to trump that. So when it comes to that, I think combining the two, a certification and experience, is going to be, the best route to go as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, if you agree or disagree with this, but would you say it's a because there's some people who have a lot of experience and have been doing it for a long time that still don't know what the fuck they're doing. They still don't know what the fuck they're giving in terms of they'll tell you that you need to, you ketosis is required for fat loss, and the only way you can lose weight is if you're on a keto diet, or just tons of different crazy things, or like the carnivore. There's pills that help you burn fat when you sleep and all this. And like, would you agree that there's also like a line between like it's not just experience and or education, it's also like, are you actually good at your job and following evidence-based practice?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And it's funny you brought that up. I actually saw a registered dietitian, I think it was on TikTok the other day, and they were giving recommendations for protein for an active individual, right? So you and I know, the general rule of thumb is like 1 gram per pound of body weight for, a healthy weight individual as far as protein recommendation goes. And they were saying something like zero 0.6 grams per kilogram, which is extremely low for an athletic person. And to me, just because they had the RD certification, they were saying those things, but they had no idea what the hell they were talking about. So it's something I see all the time that's really frustrating.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is the other RD I actually had on my podcast, uh her well, she obviously has a very different background from you. She actually worked with people like elderly people primarily. And one of the things she mentioned was like general protein recommendations for athletes and such is they actually seem to be getting they I know it's probably there's definitely a lot of nuance, because now that I think of this, I think of a counterpoint to my own statement I'm about to make. But there's recently been guidelines that have actually lowered them. Have you heard about any of this?
Yeah, yeah, I have. I feel like I followed a research review. I can't, the name is slipping me, but there was a recent like research review that I read talking about that. And yes, 1 gram per pound is probably overshooting it. I don't think anyone really needs that. But for most people, they're not going to hit that anyway. So having that as a, higher goal to aim for, I think is beneficial. So again, it comes back to the behavioral piece. Like if you aim higher and they come a little short, but they're just where they should be, then to me, that's a success. So it comes back to that.
So what do you think about people who are not like realistically going to be able to get 1 gram per pound of 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, or maybe they have a very large amount of weight to lose. So 1 gram per pound of body weight would be a lot of calories, and that would probably put them too high. Or they're not, I know these are different circumstances, but they're also not, or perhaps not good at tracking or have no experience with tracking their protein intake. Just the general thread here is someone who doesn't feel like they are able to realistically hit that protein number. What would your advice or thoughts be on how to deal with someone in that situation?
Yeah, so I have had many clients in that situation.
Me too. That's why I ask.
Yeah, of course. So I think one, if someone is not tracking, it's important to realize, your sources of protein, because some protein sources are going to be way more, used by the body and able to be used than others. So
do you think tracking is required?
No. Mm-mm. No, definitely not required. I lean more towards tracking for most people that I do work with, just because it's such a good education tool, but it's definitely not required. So anyway, going back to, your animal source proteins versus your plant source proteins. Your animal is going to be a much more quality source of protein that your body is able to use with regards to, using it in your muscles and your tissues, than a plant-based protein source. So kind of talking about those kinds of things and getting more quality sources of protein, I think would be more important in that aspect.
What if they're vegan?
It becomes tricky. Vegans is like, it becomes very tricky. I have had a couple of clients who are vegan. I think it comes down to, you probably have to track. If you're really serious about hitting your protein and, having these body composition goals, I think being a vegan, tracking is definitely going to be important, because there's not a lot of high quality vegan sources of protein that are going to get you to that amount.
Well, one of the things about people who have vegan diets is they generally tend to, on average, just eat less calories than people who have, an omnivore diet, right? And people who are vegan also tend to, on average, be more conscious of their food decisions, from what I understand. So that might be right up their alley anyway, just doing the tracking.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you think about it, think of animal foods and then think of plant foods. Which one is going to fill you up more quickly and be less amount of calories? Animal versus plant. Right. So it's going to be
as being me, I would be like, well, there's a lot of nuance to it. It depends on if we're talking about lean proteins. Are we talking about high fat proteins? Are we talking about sugar, something, for example, like something that's, there's lots of vegan treats that are plant-based, but they have a crap ton of sugar and like coconut fat. Right.
True. Yeah. Yeah. So think about,
my thought is it depends. That's my,
it does. Like anything with nutrition, it depends. But let's say for the average person, that doesn't eat any fruits and vegetables, if they all of a sudden start adding a lot of fruits and veggies, they're probably going to be a lot fuller and a lot less calories than someone who eats, dairy products and full fat meat products and all of those kinds of things. So to me, I think like your high fiber, foods that are in the plant-based group, because animal foods don't have fiber, those are going to fill you up more for less amount of calories overall.
Right. And just so everybody knows, Oreos are vegan.
They are
100%. That means they're healthy. It's
got to be.
Right. So after going back to where I know we're kind of jumping all over the place here, but going back to where you went to school as a dietitian, or to become a dietitian, at what point did you decide that was what you wanted to do? Did you know this in high school? Did you know this, did you start out majoring this, or did you change your major halfway through? Like, what was kind of the path?
Yeah, great question. So this is something that I actually am shooting myself in the foot for. I knew that I wanted to do something related to nutrition. And to me, being a freshman in college, I was like, all right, well, I have to be a registered dietitian if I want to give nutrition advice. That was kind of where the space was at that point. So I was like, all right, well, this is my only option. I have to become a registered dietitian. And now I am happy I did it, but I guess old me didn't know that there were other avenues I could go to, not become a registered dietitian and still do something in the field of nutrition. So I am happy I did it, but definitely not necessary for especially the online coaching that I do now. But it definitely is kind of a leg up from some other coaches. So
Yeah, because if someone sees they're trying to get a nutrition coach and they know like anything about the fact that like anybody on the face of the planet can call themselves a nutritionist, regardless of whether or not they have a certification, but an RD actually requires like a significant amount of schooling to get, they would probably choose the RD. If it's two people who they trust equally, they would probably, if they're a logical person, go for the RD.
Yeah. And I will say getting the RD certification, you have to go through a lot, right? I got my master's degree at the same time. I did over 1,000 hours of supervised practice, which was completely unpaid, as well as, studying for the exam for a couple months. So there's a lot you have to go through. So that's why, I do put a lot of weight in the certification and, what it holds. But there's also other ways to get that experience. I could have gone a whole different route and still kind of gotten to the same place, if that makes sense.